All right, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple of minutes as people start coming in. So just be patient for about 2 minutes and we'll get this show going. Appreciate everyone being here today. For everyone just coming in now, just give us 1 or 2 minutes while we wait for people to come on, and we'll get started here in about 1 minute and 30 seconds. Give us about 30 more seconds as we wait for people to come in, and we'll get this thing going. All right. Well, really everyone on here today, and welcome to today's webinar. We are the Road to Retail team. Want to thank anybody who was on our previous 2 webinars. Today, we're really discussing the top 10 questions that we chose from the previous webinars. So my name is Ari Sherman. I'll be your moderator today. I'm the co-founder and president of Evo Hemp, and I'm part of the Road to Retail team. I'm pleased to introduce one of today's speakers, Tracy Priest. Tracy is a 30-year veteran of the consumer packaged goods industry, rich with experience in both sales and marketing. Tracy held several sales positions at blue chip companies where he drove specific programs, increasing both market share and sales at large retailers in all classes of trade. For more than a decade, Tracy has owned and operated his own sales and trade marketing consulting firm, providing sales leadership with some of the most notable CPG companies and emerging brands. I'm also pleased to introduce our other speaker today, Bruce Montgomery. Bruce has been in commercial operations functions within the consumer packaged goods firms for the majority of his 30-year career. He has served in executive leadership positions in marketing, sales, business development, new product development, logistics, store brand, and brand acquisition and divestiture. He was part of the executive team that led successful sale of Fleet Laboratories to private equity in 2015. Before I hand the mic over to Tracy and Bruce, I have a few housekeeping items to cover about this presentation. First, today's webinar will be available on demand after the live session, as well as the downloadable PDF of this presentation deck. Links will be sent to everyone that attended. Next, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. If you have any questions for our speakers, please feel free to submit your questions at the bottom of your screen. We'll be answering questions at the end of the session. If we don't get to your question during today's webinar, we'll be sure to follow up afterward. And last, I'd like to encourage you to share today's webinar with your social networks. So without further ado, let's get started on this road to retail. I'd love to hand it over to Bruce right now, who will go over the top 10 questions from our previous webinars.
Thanks, Ari. So just to give those people who might not have been able to attend one or both of the first 2 sessions, to bring you up to speed, in April, we interviewed buyers at national retailers representing approximately a dozen of the largest retailers in the US. And we asked them a series of questions of what they look for in a small and emerging brand, what gets their attention and what gets them to give a meeting, what makes a good meeting. So to briefly recap, the areas that we probed were what gets a retailer to agree to and meet with a smaller emerging brand, what are the meeting expectations of the buyer at these retailers, how should the brand prepare, What does a buyer look for and consider to be a quote unquote good meeting? What should the content and length of a meeting be when you get that shot with a buyer? Hint, it's not 80 pages. Then there was a discussion around understanding the critical key metrics of how your brand is going to be evaluated, and also how the buyer is evaluated and compensated. You know, what does success look for them? And one of the key takeaways as we get into today is always remember the buyer is much more motivated by how their category performs rather than your individual brand. If your brand is not helping them build their category, you're going to have some troubles. And then lastly, what is the best way to follow up, both in terms of speed of follow-up and how buyers prefer to receive that follow-up? So that level sets where we probed when we discussed what a small and emerging brand needs to do to get the attention of these national retailers. So with that, we're going to get into the key questions that came in from these sessions, both during the sessions and then once the sessions were over. We thought it would be helpful to go through these top questions for the broader audience, whether it's specific to what's on your mind. We can all learn a little bit in terms of what's going on and how these retailers are looking at it. So with that, I'm going to throw it to Tracy to go through this first question.
Great, thanks, Bruce. And I did want to add one more thing to everybody. We do have a YouTube channel. So if you are just joining us for the first time and want to listen to those webinars, we do have them on our YouTube channel, Road to Retail, and you can listen to both of those. So I think you'll find those helpful, especially if you were not able to join the first two sessions. So again, just as another reminder, as Ari had mentioned, please shoot us your questions through the Q&A throughout this session as you have them, and then we'll get to them at the end. So the first topic I want to go to talk about this today is what is a go-to-market strategy and what does it entail? And I can't emphasize enough how important this is. I was thinking about this when we were putting this together and the question came up, and this is like getting in your car and not having a destination or not know where you're going. So just to give you a little thought there on how we look at this. So we're going to go through on these next two pages a little bit about what are the key elements of a go-to-market strategy. And the first thing you need to think about is what class of trade do I want to pursue? I know when we were doing some of the interviews, we did hear from some buyers that, you know, not every brand is good for the dollar channel. So if you don't have a 99-cent item or a $1.99 item, you know, the dollar channel is probably not where you want to go. If you are a brand and you don't have a club pack, you know, for a Costco or a Sam's, that's probably somewhere that you don't want to go. Another consideration is when you look at the other classes of trade, like for the natural channel, do your ingredients you know, work in the natural channel? A Whole Foods and other retailers have specific banned ingredients, so you want to think about that. The drug channel, for example, is a very expensive channel to do business in. So you've got to look at that and say, okay, can I afford, you know, to be in that very expensive channel? So just some examples, and then you've got to look at, you know, the distributors to the natural channel and other retailers, UNFI and KeHE, where do I want to go, and what, you know, what distributor do I want to try and work with first? And then what you want to do is drill down into those key retailer targets. So do you want to look at, again, based on the channel, and then where you want to go with specific retailers. I've worked with brands where they started out and Walmart was their first retailer. And that can be a little scary because of pricing and margin that Walmart requires. So you really have to think about where you want to go first. And again, depending on the channel and how expensive it is and how it is to get into, and then look at the retailers from there. Another key point is understanding the retailer's category review schedule. You may say, hey, I want to go to Whole Foods first, but then you look at the review calendar and you realize that the review for salty snacks or CBD, as we're talking today, has already happened. Well, you got to realize that that review schedule only happens once a year. Some of the other major retailers like a Kroger, a CVS, a Walgreens, they all have very specific retail review schedules. So if you miss those, you're going to have to wait for the next, the next review, which in many cases is, a year away. So very key consideration. And then demand plan. So we heard from the retailers that we interviewed that you really have to have a support plan, how you're going to support your brand with the consumer and how you're going to support the brand with that specific retailer. So that's really a very important part, is they're going to look for how are you going to pull the product and build awareness and trial in their stores, directly marketing to the consumer and to that retailer's specific shopper. So Bruce, I want to turn it over to you and see what else you wanted to add to that, to what I've reviewed today.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. A little more color around the consumer marketing plan. One of the great quotes we got back from a buyer was, you need to prove to me that this brand or launch is important to you and that you're committed to it before you ask me to commit to it. So they want to see. We had instances where buyers said they've asked for proof that you have the funding to drive this plan. So here they're talking about your advertising plan, your PR plan. Are you going to do sponsorships? Like, if your brand's big enough, would you do something like March Madness? Are you going to do events? What's your digital plan? What, if anything, might you do with things like sampling? But they really want to see that you're committed to that. And another thing we've heard, which is also true for those veterans on the phone who've been in the industry, a couple of decades, one of the rules of thumb was you didn't really turn on your national marketing plan until you hit about 65% ACV. Then it kind of switched to whenever Walmart and Target and Kroger picked it up, you turned it on. Well, I can tell you right now, all of these retailers, they start the clock as soon as you are scanning in what they consider to be a good number of stores. And it appears that that number is around 30%. So holding back on your marketing until more of your accounts are carrying your item is really dangerous, because as we heard, you will start getting phone calls in 60 to 90 days. And a lot of buyers have said, especially those with some experience under their belt, that they can really kind of tell a dog within 30 to 60 days. So it's real important to get off to a good start. Ari, do you have anything you'd like to add here?
I appreciate, both of those great insights. I think, one of the most important things for our brand when we're looking at a go-to-market strategies, it's really what we're willing to say no to. It can be really exciting when some of these really large retailers, you get a commitment from a really big retailer, they get really excited about your product, but you might not be ready to enter in that class of trade yet. Especially if you're talking about these big club stores or, a Walmart or a Target, it can get really exciting to see all of the potential doors that you're about to get opened. But then you really look at it and say, is this brand and is this product, ready for that channel yet? It might be a little early. You might have to build that brand awareness or build that category awareness before it's, going to hit one of those big club stores and be successful, because, sometimes you only get one chance. And when you miss that chance, it's really hard to get back in there. So sometimes it's better to say no, and brand or product is ready to go. But like to move over to the next question.
Yeah, I want to comment on what you said. I want to comment on what you said, Ari, because that's such an important point. Is when you get into a retailer and you're so excited, you want to say yes to everything, but the hardest part is saying no. And I can't emphasize that enough. A lot of the brands that I've been associated with through the years have had a really hard time saying no to retailers, because they're going to ask for everything. And we're going to get into that. That's a great segue into some of the other elements that go into a go-to-market strategy. One is pricing. This is another critical point. So MSRP is manufacturer suggested retail price. Make no mistake that the retailer controls the pricing. So when you give them your cost to them, whether that's a distributor price or a direct price, they're going to take that and fit that into their pricing model based on their margin requirements. Walmart, for example, their pricing ends in an 8. Some other retailers end in a 9. So they're going to take that and determine the pricing. So, and we're going to talk about some trade math later on in here on how to figure out margin and markup. Bruce is going to take us through that so that you have a good idea of what the pricing could potentially be. Another way to know what the pricing is going to be is to really know what your competitor's price point is and what the category will bear. When we're talking CBD and other expensive items, the price points are pretty much or very much up there. But you really want to think about, okay, am I going to position my brand as a premium brand, or is my brand going to be an opening price point brand? So those are all things that you need to consider when looking at your retail pricing, because you're not in control of it. Product specs. This is also a big one. You don't want big case packs, 24, 48 per pack, because it won't fit all on the shelf. You've got smaller case packs are better because you'll get faster turns. You have to think about the capacity of a shelf. I know if you have if you're a brand on today and you have a refrigerated brand, you have to realize that maybe a cooler will only hold 6, 8, 9 units. So you don't want to have a 24 case pack that it won't all go on the shelf, because the rest of it will go in the back room, get lost, damaged, whatever, and that's not good for anyone. Also, you have to think about special handling. As an example, if your product is shipping during the summer, we were associated with a brand that was just shipping out samples, and they were getting to the retail customer, and they were melted. So if you've got chocolate in your product, or you've got something that maybe it's a gummy, you've got to make sure that you do some testing in your shipping to make sure that it's not going to melt, especially in the summer months in transit. And then trade spend. We're going to spend some time on this today on a couple other slides, but trade spend, again, you've got to, one thing is you better make sure that you've got a trade spend budget. What can you afford to spend on slotting? And I know Ari can talk to this very specifically. What off invoice can I offer? What can I afford? And then have an annual plan. And then another big one that people don't really think about is, what is the cost of failure? In the drug channel, for example, they're going to want a 35 to 50% markdown. And then whatever doesn't sell, they're going to return it to you. So you've got to make sure that you've got that calculated in your trade spend in case things don't work out the way you want it to. At a distributor, they're going to give you 3 options if your product fails. Can we donate it to a local food bank? Do you want us just to destroy it? Or do we want to return it to you, at your expense? So those are just, again, some things to think about, more things to think about in your go-to-market strategy. Guys?
Yeah,
thoughts?
so thanks, Tracy. So real quickly on a few of the points, when Tracy talked about MSRP, specific to Walmart, if you start talking suggested retail price, they'll just cut you off. The only thing they care about is their acquisition price, and then they'll tell you that they'll handle their own pricing. Thank you very much. Special handling, again, Tracy's points are excellent, but you also have to think through it. Not only how does your product need to be shipped, but how will it need to be stored? Because if it needs to be stored, refrigerated, or frozen, all of that is incremental costs that you need to build into your plan, and also realize that that space is even more precious than ambient or shelf stable. And then lastly, cost of failure is critical. I just recently saw a presentation from a large HBA company, and in their introductory materials, they had outlined specifically what they were willing to pay if something failed. So I had not seen that before. Maybe that's SOP for that organization, but I have been on the receiving end of some kind of nasty bills, especially from the drug class of trade. As Tracy said, very expensive to do business there. You know, they'll come up with reasons. I was getting bills for excessive shrink, which is theft, excessive damages, but they were the only account billing me for damaged goods. And I got tired of getting all these bills. So eventually I told them to return stuff to me so that we could see it ourselves. And magically, some of our billing cleaned up a little bit. So those are just some things to be aware of, because those are the kinds of expenses that you sometimes don't budget for, but they're still very real. And even if your product's not failing, if it's selling a little slower than you thought, you might be getting up against expiration dates. So you just have to be alert. Ari, anything to add there?
Yeah, you know, there's a couple things that really stick out to me on this slide. The first one is obviously the special handling. You know, with special handling, I think it's incredibly important to, you know, really make sure that you plan everything through. You know, one of the biggest things you can do is to, you know, really, you know, incorporate thermometers. I was talking to my friend Justin from Justin's Nut Butter, and they have this really great, you know, little device that they put inside of the pallets, and it will test the temperature throughout the entire life cycle of when the product was in their warehouse to when the product hits the retailer. And then they actually get those retailers to send that little thermometer back into, you know, Justin's facility so they can track the temperature throughout its whole life cycle. Because he has chocolate products, for example, so they might, you know, melt during shipping. So you got to make sure that you're tracking that all the way through. The next thing is the slotting. You know, Tracy brought up a really good point. You know, it's incredibly important to make sure you're monitoring these slotting fees, because they can get really expensive. I know some of the bigger retailers like a Safeway, you know, it might cost you $90,000 as a brand to enter in those stores. And it's going to take a long time to recoup that $90,000. So you have to make sure that, you know, you are going to be really strong once you hit that store. Go over to the next slide here. What are the costs of doing business with national retailers and how to budget?
Okay, so thank you. So understanding each retailer's unique schedule, Tracy already went into this, and part of this is where you can get help from a really good specialty broker that works only within, say, that account, because they're in there all the time. But these dates, especially for a smaller and emerging brand, they're in stone. Okay, so there's a couple that go through the calendar. There's the call for new items. There's the line review if you already have some distribution, where you'll come in, see how you're doing, how did you do against plan, do you have new items, what are you going to stop doing, start doing. You'll go through your annual plan. Then there'll be another date for adds and deletes. Which items are they keeping, which are they deleting? And then that results in what the new planogram, or as Walmart calls a modular, looks like. And you'll see where you stand on the shelf, and then they'll give you a date of when that new mod is going to drop in the stores. So these are all dates that are super critical to understand, because as Tracy said, if you miss them, you're pretty much out of luck until the next year. And again, for smaller and emerging brands, these big accounts are not going to bend for you. Okay, you have to fit to them. The only times I've ever seen big retailers amend their schedule is if in the drug world, if there's a big RX to OTC switch, so a formerly prescription drug moving over the counter, if there's going to be a big launch with a massive marketing budget like Procter & Gamble, like 50 million bucks, they'll sometimes bend. Or if you are willing to foot the bill to pay to have the shelf reset, they'll sometimes bend there. But so all of those are really expensive. So I can't emphasize enough knowing what these schedules are. And Tracy is going to get into this in greater detail. But again, cost of doing business, I just spoke about some of the hidden costs around you know, shrink, expiring goods, damage, etc. So knowing that. And then slotting and free fill. If you're at an established company, your finance team probably already has a way you do this. Slotting is a cash expense. Free fill is free goods. Sometimes it's a case per store, let's just say. And then you have to work with your finance team to see how that's booked. Okay, do they book it at COGS, at cost of goods, or do they book it at the price you would get if you were selling it into an account? And what happens is a lot of times once you make that initial decision, and this is where you should check with your accounting firm, that's what you do from then forward. You can't kind of change it every time you feel like it. Introductory allowances are another place to be really careful. I've been involved with new items or new brands where you'll put a pretty smoking intro allowance on there to try to help drive some distribution or drive timing of distribution or maybe one extra SKU. You have to be very careful with some of the national retailers that they don't quote unquote mistakenly think that your introductory allowance is your forever allowance. Okay, so you got to keep a good paper trail so you can go back and say, no, that was just for opening order or only good for the first 60 days. Then you get into the trade planning. Again, this is something you would do in concert with your buyer and your sales agent or broker. And you can do this annually. Usually it's an annual plan reviewed quarterly. How are you doing? Where are you short? Where are you ahead? You kind of settle up on the money. And then for those of you that have been in this a while, you can either do an annual plan and fund it, or if you have a business that's a bit more established, you accrue a pot of money, which kind of means you build it up and you spend out of that pot. So let's say at Kroger, you have a 5% accrual, 5% of sales goes into that pot, and then you work with your buyer and sales agent to build the best plan you can out of that money. So it's kind of success driven. So that's a nice thing about that. And as you're going to hear, these trade expenses, they are sometimes negotiable, but they are not optional. Okay, so people who think you're going to somehow get around this because you play tennis with somebody from HEB or something, that's not how it goes. Tracy, anything to add here?
Yeah, I just wanted to give an example of the timing. For example, at Walmart, they review or they reset the stores twice per year, once in August, September, and again in January, February, and then they back it up from there on your presentation, your line reviews, and all of that. But again, they have like you said, a process, a sequence where everything has to line up. And if you miss those dates, you're, like Bruce said, out of luck. I also wanted to address the introductory allowance part of it. Typically, if you're working with a distributor like a KeHE or a UNFI, which we'll get into a little bit more in detail here, they typically are looking for a 90-day intro of something between 10 and 15%, usually 15%. So keep that in mind. And then on the free fill part of it, and I wanted to mention one of the other things that I talked about in the earlier slide about case pack, in the natural channel especially, they're going to be looking for a free fill. So for expensive items, it may be 3 pieces, it might be buy one, get one free, it might be, one case. So that's another thing, another reason to keep your case pack small. If there's, let's say 6 pieces and a retailer wants a 1 case free fill, then you're giving them 6 pieces, not 18, 12, 24. So it can get expensive when you get bigger case packs.
Yeah, those are all really great points. I really think that this is one of the most important slides that we'll go over today. It might not be the most exciting one, but this is, incredibly important coming from a brand side of things. If you don't watch, what these allowances are, what your promotions are, and you're working with some of these big distributors like UNFI or KeHE, it can really, damage your business. I mean, from example, we've, invoiced a UNFI or a KeHE, $100,000, and yet when we get paid, that check is, less than 20,000. And you don't really know when you're going through this bill or, this payment. They have all these kind of acronyms, and you really have to understand what they all mean, because it's basically all the allowances and promotions and different slotting you have with all these various retailers, and it can really add up. So again, I think that, it's not the most exciting thing, but really having a strong understanding of your promotional plan and these allowances is incredibly important to your business.
Hey, Ari, before you go on, I want to add one more thing too on the promotional planning part. Keep in mind too, when you're talking about timing, that many of these retailers are working 6 months out or more. There's retailers, right now we're in May and June that are asking for 2021 plans, or they're asking brands to submit for December, January promotions already. So again, if you miss those timelines, you're not going to be able to run that promotion. So another thing to keep in mind.
Hey guys, one last point on case packs, because there's actually nothing sexier than a good case pack discussion. A lot of buyers at some of the larger retailers are only allocated a certain amount of money to invest in inventory. So if you have an item that's more expensive and your case pack is very big, that's really working against you. Not only for the reason Tracy said that if they want one case free per store, you have a huge case pack. If your product is expensive and they're evaluated partially on their investment in inventory dollars, it's working against you there too. So just another thing to be careful about.
Good point, Bruce.
All right. Are any of these expenses negotiable or avoidable?
They are negotiable, but they are not avoidable. So make no mistake that the buyers, as we say here in point 2, are incentivized, it's probably not a word, to harvest trade dollars. And in many cases, those buyers are evaluated based on the amount of promotional dollars they bring in for their category. If they're not compensated, they're at least evaluated on that. So you've got to keep that in mind. So if you enter into a retailer and your mindset is, I'm not paying slotting, I'm not going to do TPRs, et cetera, you're going to be at a significant disadvantage. But again, getting back to Ari's great point, we're not saying that you can't say no, but you can't say no to everything. As an example, a brand that we're associated with is looking to run a TPR at a major drug chain. And that drug chain wanted $10,000 just to put up a TPR tag, not to include the scan amount that they wanted. So again, we were able to negotiate the fee for the TPR, but we're still running the scan and we're able to negotiate part of the deal. So that's just an example there. And then we've kind of listed here a couple of the different types of trade promotional programs. So TPR, if you're new to the industry, is temporary price reduction. That can go anywhere from 1 week to 4 weeks. Ads are definitely a revenue generator for retailers. So whatever they charge, $3,000, $5,000, $7,000, and they're charging every retail partner or brand for that. It certainly is a revenue stream for them. Displays, we think are probably one of the better vehicles to participate in, because they have to buy product. And again, when you're looking at all of these trade programs, keep in mind that you are trying to drive trial and awareness for your brand. So that's something to keep in mind as you look at these different trade programs. Couponing, a lot of retailers now are going to online couponing. There's also programs like Ibotta, which is an app where you can get coupons for your brand. So those are things. E-commerce is obviously in the pandemic that we're in is just been huge. So if you have a chance to work with a retailer, let's say a Target, and Target.com's business is up, gosh, 147% right now. So if you have an opportunity to be on one of their websites, I definitely recommend that. And then there's combo elements. Hey, I'll do an ad if you'll give me a display for free, or I'll do a TPR if you'll throw in the ad. So again, there is negotiations that can be had there. And then you've got pilot programs that retailers do. For an example, I just got one just yesterday from a drugs chain that says, hey, we're going to try this out. And it went out to 70, 80 people, and it said, hey, we have 10 spots, and the first 10, let me know who's interested, and we'll give you that spot. So those kinds of things pop up, and you definitely want to evaluate those. I know those are near and dear to Bruce's heart. So That's what I've got on that page.
Yeah,
Bruce?
so just, thank you. So just to add a couple of things here to Tracy's points, and I'm going to focus on the bottom 3 bullets here. So in e-commerce, especially in the current COVID environment, if you're in, food or HBA or OTC, you might be aware of this, but you might not know the magnitude. I mean, Amazon, obviously massive. So statement of the obvious. Then there's a huge gap, and then there's Walmart.com. Then there's even a bigger gap, and then there's everybody else. So a couple of things. If for the retailers that are publicly traded, they are all under the gun to drive their e-commerce business. So some of it's not that big. Target's making some nice headway, but it's still a very small base. However, that could be a good way for a smaller or emerging brand to kind of endear yourself to these retailers. Because one of the things we heard over and over from these retailer interviews, the buyers said small and emerging brands need to be easy to do business with and not be needy. We're going to talk about needy in a minute, but be easy to do business with. Raise your hand. Combo elements. As Tracy said, this is where you can really try to get creative, and instead of just ordering off the menu of TPRs, ads, etc., try to engage them. And if you have some math on your side to kind of explain the logic of what you're trying to do and why you're recommending it, that's even more helpful. And then lastly, as Tracy said, his example is perfect. These retailers are always under the gun from their own marketing teams, trying to develop new merchandising vehicles that they can harvest trade dollars from their supplier universe. But raise your hand, because a lot of these buyers are really under the gun, and sometimes it's very short timelines where they have to get, hey, I need 8 people from my supplier community in this event. And sometimes it's stuff where you kind of got to, swallow hard and just do it because it buys you some goodwill later, whether that's sponsoring a table at a manager show, buying a table at some charity golf event, who knows? But it could be like Target when they first started Cartwheel several years ago. That really paid off for the people that were willing to work with them to develop that. So I would be, again, easy to do business with, be creative, get involved with some of these pilot programs. But the other thing, any of these trade spends, keep incredibly detailed records of what works and what doesn't work. Ari?
Yeah, those are all really great points. I appreciate that, Bruce and Tracy. A couple of things that I want to just mention is, there's ways to be stronger at the negotiating table. The obvious one is, make sure you have a great product that sells and that you have a lot of data that can back that up. Retailers and distributors are much more willing to work with brands on negotiating trade spend if they know that they're going to be having a lot of people ringing those doors. So having lots of sales going through is obviously a great way to negotiate. And another lesser known one, and this doesn't work with every distributor or retailer, but sometimes offering limited exclusivity to certain products gives you a lot of leverage at the negotiating table. I know right now at Evo Hemp, we have exclusivity with our keto hemp bars at Whole Foods Market right now. So they have a 90-day exclusive to be the first ones to market our new keto hemp bars. And that gives us a lot of leverage when not only negotiating with the retailer, but their main distributor, UNFI, as well.
Good point.
So
okay,
we're going to move on to the next section here.
Okay, so you will know that at the beginning of this presentation, we did not say there would be no math. And oh my gosh, every single participant just clicked off.
Oh, Bruce.
So as Ari said, fear not, you guys. This will be in what we'll post later that you can download. So what we wanted to do was just provide a couple of definitions and simple equations for things that are talked about a lot. And again, for all of you industry veterans, this like falling out of bed. For those of you that might be new to this, these will hopefully be helpful. So next screen, please. So there's 2 ways that you look at pricing. Margin, which is what people almost always speak to, but sometimes what they're really doing is markup. They're taking what we're calling the RAC, the retailer acquisition cost, and they're saying 5 times 1.35, that's my margin. Actually, no, that's your markup. Okay, so here is the simple equation for margin. and you can back into this from several different directions. These are two old equations I've had since my very early training in brand management from my former P&G boss. So if anyone disputes it, I will give you his email address and you can bring it up with him. But so this is the simple equation to determine margin. Now, what's important about this is, since most retailers talk about they have margin requirements, if you know those in advance and you know your cost of goods and what you want to charge the retailer, the rack, what you're going to charge them, you can tinker around with their ballpark margin requirement, and you're going to know whether they're going to be happy with your item or if they're going to be sad about your item, because you're putting margin compression on them, or you're asking for compression. Often they won't take it, but this is helpful for you to understand what you're walking into. Again, all this will be in what you guys can look at the end of the presentation. You can download this. Next, please, Ari. So this is simple markup. Again, you take the rack, their desired markup is 35%. It's really, 5 times the 1.35 gets you 6.75 in this example. Okay, so you can see markup, margin, they're different numbers. And margin refers to how much of every dollar you keep after paying your expenses, and markup is what you make when you add on to your rack. So hopefully that's reasonably clear. These examples I think are really clear. So when we're not under time pressure of the webinar and letting you guys get back to your day, these will be helpful for you. I'm going to go to one more equation, and then I'll ask if Tracy or Ari want to comment, and then I promise no more math. One more, please.
Promise.
Yes, promise. So the other thing that you get squeezed on, especially as your brand gets established and as Ari's talking about, and you go into your annual planning sessions, and knowledge is power. And a lot of the way you gain knowledge is by gaining experience. And experience comes in 2 flavors, good and bad, but it's still experience and you keep track of it. So when you do look at your ROIs for trade spending, the number one thing you have to remember is you're not calculating it off of your total units sold. You're only calculating it off of your incremental units sold. Because if you have an established item, you would have sold something if you didn't run a promo. Because if you're not selling anything, you're on your way to being delisted, right? And then you don't use the sales revenue, you use your profit per incremental unit, because you still have to cover your costs, right? Because you're making the stuff. So you take your incremental profit on your incremental units and you back out the cost of the event, right? And then you always see in the equation, well, why do I -1? Well, you got to recoup your investment. Okay, so in this instance, your promo cost you $8,500. You drove $22,750 in incremental profit. By the time you back out your $850, you're at a 1.68 to the positive, and to put it into a percent, you multiply by 100. So again, that probably sounded like a pretty big mouthful, but this is the simple equation. So if I leave you with 2 takeaways, you're only looking at incremental units, you're looking at profit of incremental units, and you got to cover your promo cost. And the better you get at keeping track of all this stuff, you'll know the kinds of promos you want to do. And sometimes you're going to have to do things that are underwater because maybe you're playing the long game. Okay, maybe you were cutting orders, so you kind of owe the buyer a proper, or you're coming with 2 new items in 2 months, so you want this person in a good mindset. That's not stuff that if you're just looking at it black and white, purely financial, you would never play the long game. But sometimes you don't have that luxury. And then the last one, since I lied, the other thing that is important is to understand your hurdle rate. If your buyer won't give it to you for some reason, which they all will, or you don't have a sales agent, try to get a product ranking report. And to keep it simple, let's say there's 100 items in your category. Draw that line, divide it into fifths, okay? So in this instance, every 20 SKUs is where you would draw a line. If you're in that bottom 20, if you're in the 80 to 100 SKU, you are at high risk of being discoed. If you're in that second bottom 20, so you're a bottom 40 item in this 100 SKU category, you need to be really alert. So that's the little bit of trade math we'd offer. And there's a little more color on this in the appendix that you can download. But Ari and Tracy, anything to add here?
No, I think I'm hoping that our participants today are finding this really helpful, because this is some great information that you can use to, one, make sure you're evaluating your promotions, and two is that you're understanding markup and margin, so that when you're looking at your retail pricing, which is a key point, key portion of the, your go-to-market strategy, you've got now the tools to make sure that your calculations are correct. So as painful as that was, Bruce, that was great and simple.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I
Ari?
really appreciate you guys sharing this. It's, especially this last slide here, the return on investment equation is obviously so important. And for a lot of us that, have investors in their businesses, they're always asking, okay, I see you want to do all of these ads and promotions, but what's our return on investment going to be? Is this going to be worth it for us in the end? So being able to, show this equation up front and try to, track it and make sure that it falls in line once you went through with this promotion is a great way to, negotiate with your investors when you want to do another ad or another promotion. So what is a distributor and what do they do for our brand?
Yeah, so this is, I'm going to take this one. So let me tell you what a distributor is, and that is a logistics provider for your brand. Let me tell you what they're not. They are not going to promote and build your brand. So I've worked with many of brands that continually get disappointed with their partnership relationship with a UNFI and a KeHE, for example. And unfortunately, they are a necessary evil, especially to the natural channel. For example, if you want to get your products to a Whole Foods region or a Whole Foods globally, you're going to have to go through the distributor UNFI. KeHE is the key supplier, and we'll go into this in a little bit more, to retailers like Sprouts. So, like I said, I've had many meetings where brands have walked out and been, really disappointed, but you've got to really just understand and manage your expectations. They are a logistics provider. You, the brand, are responsible for building the brand to a consumer or at a specific retailer. They are just the gateway to get your product from a distribution center to a specific retailer that they partner with. So one other thing I wanted to bring here, so they do have some marketing plans or programs that you can participate in that help you get your brand out to specific retailers. They do a lot with obviously independent natural channel retailers as an example. And so they're going to ask you, as we talked about earlier, for off invoice allowances. Make no mistake, that's how they make their money. Like we talked about earlier, they're going to ask you for some kind of intro allowance when you're launching your brand. They do circulars, which are ads. And then they have marketing agreements that they're going to want you to sign. As an example, a light level agreement, is, X amount of dollars deducted from your invoice quarterly. And then that gives you special pricing deducted or gets you special pricing on programs that they have. But they have all kinds of programs, and make no doubt that they're going to try and sell you on those programs. And the ones you want to really look at are the ones that are going to, build awareness of your brand with specific retailers, and especially with, the independent natural channel, which they're definitely experts on. Bruce and Ari, anything on that?
Yeah, Tracy and Ari have much more experience dealing with KeHE and UNFI, but they're going to go into that here in a moment. But what I can tell you is for those of you that are thinking of taking your business perhaps internationally, be very careful of distributors that say they'll take your business either whether it's into Mexico or into the Caribbean. They'll try to tell you that this is all incremental business, but they will pad and ask for these huge price breaks in order to add in their margins, et cetera. And if you're not really careful, this is how you create a secondary market for your products at prices better than you're selling to your accounts. So be really careful if you start to try to go down the international path. And if you're already there, maybe you've been burned in the past. If you haven't, congratulations for vetting your distributors well, but be very careful. That's where you want to keep track of, especially the first time you send them an order. Keep track of those lot numbers so that if you start seeing your product out on the wire at low prices, you can match up those lot numbers and you'll know if you're dealing with a bad partner. Ari?
Yeah, I think one of the most important lines in here is, these distributors a lot of times are a necessary evil. We've tried to negotiate with distributors and retailers. For example, we approached Whole Foods Market if we could, go direct with them because we're a global brand of theirs in all their stores. We offer them, exclusive products. We have a great relationship. Even after all of that, they said, no, you're required to go through UNFI. It's the only way where we're going to bring in your product. So if you have a food product or, a body care product and you want to enter in retailers like Whole Foods Market, you have to be willing to work with these distributors. And those marketing programs that were discussed there, a lot of the times, those are requirements. Yes, you can negotiate some of them, but do not expect to go into a large distributor like UNFI and KeHE and tell them that you don't want to play any of their games and don't want to do any of their marketing programs because they will refuse to take on your product. So make sure that when, you're looking at those margins, and again, when, you're getting this, you invoice them X amount of dollars, just know that they're going to be taking a lot from these off invoices and various, circulars, or, they also require you to do a lot of their trade shows that they, offer a few times a year. So make sure you're budgeting for those because they will come at you.
Yeah, great point.
So who go ahead, Tracy.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Ari. They are a necessary evil, and again, a game that you have to play if you want your products at retail. So.
Yep. So who are these necessary evils? KeHE and UNFI are some of the most known.
Who are the evil ones? So
Yes.
the two biggest ones are UNFI and KeHE. UNFI out of Providence, Rhode Island, as Ari mentioned, exclusive supplier to Whole Foods. They keep getting bigger. It is a publicly traded company, and they purchased Super Value about a year ago. They also own a DSD network and also Albert's Organic for produce. So these are the big boys. And I just wanted to give an example here, like Whole Foods negotiated markup, not margin, markup is 8.5%, and then their average margin is going to be about 25%. So just keep that, average markup to an independent retailer is going to be about 25%. So keep that in mind when you're looking at your pricing, knowing that Whole Foods is going to be on the low end, and your independent natural retailer who may have a store or 2 or 3 stores is going to be paying, a 25% markup. Then you've got KeHE out of Chicago. They supply Sprouts, most of the Publix stores, and Safeway Albertsons, and their average markup is a little bit better. It's about 17%, but again, that's an average. Benefits for working with this necessary evil. One is it's the best way to reach independent natural retailers. You've got a lot of times brands miss NCG, which is a co-op of about 300 stores. That's UNFI's second largest customer behind Whole Foods. And then you've got Infra. So you've got these groups of co-ops that pull exclusively from a UNFI or a KeHE. And then they can give you sales reports. So if you can't afford to buy Spins or IRI or Nielsen, they do have reports. Some of them you can get for free, and then some of them you have to purchase. So anyway, that's who the necessary evils are today.
Yeah, my only add to that would be that at times the sales reports you get back from these distributors can be a little frustrating, because they'll tell you where they shipped your product out to, but sometimes you don't have the optics down into their customers to kind of really know where it's selling. So again, it's frustrating, and for you smaller businesses out there that are really just getting started, that can burn a lot of time. Ari?
Yeah, I think, one of the most important numbers on this slide is Whole Foods markup at 8.5%. So what that really means to me as a brand is that UNFI doesn't really make money directly from Whole Foods. UNFI is making money from the brands that sell to Whole Foods. So like I just said in the previous slide there, those marketing programs that you are required to do with UNFI, that's where they're looking to get their money from, those off invoices, from various trade spends that's required specifically with the distributor. That's where they're profiting from. So, they have an incredible deal with Whole Foods where, they've got such a low markup, but that's barely covering their costs at UNFI. And so they're going to make up all that from the brands that sell to them. So again, just word of caution, make sure that you can negotiate with them, but you are going to have to spend those dollars.
Yeah, good point.
So what should a good broker or sales agent do for your brand?
Okay, so I'll take point on this one. So as we've been talking throughout, remember, these buyers told us that small and emerging brands need to be easy to do business with and not be needy. One of the examples we got from one of the buyers at a very large retailer was that they have seen brands or programs die because the brand or company was not capable of filling out the paperwork, whether it's a new vendor of record or promo plans. And a lot of the times they said that they'll do this as a test with these smaller brands or companies to see if they're going to be able to make it. Are they going to be able to work with them? They get irritated when they find that their admin is always on the phone or responding to emails from the exact same new or small vendor all the time. I cannot stress enough, don't be needy. So while you might say, gosh, I really can't afford or don't want to spend the money to hire a specialist in Target or, fill in the blank account, my question back is, well, can you afford to blow it? Okay, because if you get the scarlet letter that you're needy or you're hard to do business with, you might be shut out of there for a while. So a good specialty broker or sales agent, they're going to know all the key dates at these retailers that we've been talking about: new items, annual planning, add, delete, mod droppings. They're going to know how to manage all the paperwork and promo submissions. I mean, we've heard stories from these buyers of small brands that have waited and kind of really earned their shot, and then they botch filling out the promo paperwork for like Women's Health Month end cap or a seasonal end cap because they can't get the paperwork processed accurately and on time. These people will also know exactly what these costs are for ads, TPRs, the durations of each. And as Tracy said, some of it's negotiable, but at least knowing what these ballpark numbers is helps you frame your plan, because you can say, hey, I got X dollars that I'd really like to spend at this account or that I'm prepared to. What's the best way to do this? And if you have a little bit of history, going back to that trade math, you can start saying, this is the plan that we know will work best and why. And then you talk with your buyer about it. They'll know how that buyer is compensated and what his or her hot buttons are. It's usually growing my category, expanding my margin. Sometimes they measure share. If it's in, say, OTC, they might want an RX to OTC switch early, harvesting trade dollars, growing their private label. Okay, it's almost always some mix of those things is how your buyer's compensated. And then what is the buyer looking for in promo or marketing support? You may have a buyer that's new on the desk who in their previous role, he or she had a lot of success driving business through e-com. So there's a good bet that that person's going to try that same trick on this new desk. So be aware of that. Your sales agent should also be very well versed in what you guys are trying to do with your brand. The strategy, they should be able to advocate for your business inside the retailer. And another benefit is, depending upon whom you hire, you know, they're in those retailers' offices plenty. You know, as a smaller emerging brand, you might only get 1 or 2 meetings a year. If these people have other clients, they might be in there a couple of times a day or at least a couple times a week. And they can always stop by the buyer and clarify that one thing. Hey, do you have the new item form? You know, did we successfully get that promo slotted in the book? I mean, a real easy drive-by human interaction that you can't get if you're sitting at your office 1,000 miles away. Tracy, anything to add here?
No, I think 2 key points here. I can't emphasize enough the importance of being able to manage, especially at the bigger retailers, all of the new item forms, new vendor promotion. It can be just overwhelming and consuming, and especially if you're trying to navigate it, you know, on your own. So I look at this as having a brand Sherpa, someone to go alongside you and help you navigate, you know, working with these retailers and distributors. So that's how I would look at it, as somebody to just help walk alongside you in the process, that knows, has been down the road more than a couple of times.
Ari?
Yeah, all really good points. You know, I think that last bullet though really resonates with me the most, is, you know, having strong relationships with these buyers and their staff at, you know, each and individual specific retailer is, you know, obviously one of the most important things. Like most things in life, this is a relationship game. It can make or break your brand or meeting, having those good relationships. You know, whether that's having a broker that's specific to that retailer. I know in the past when we've looked at working with, you know, like a CVS or a Target, you know, you try to find a brokerage firm that is specific to that retailer, where their office is literally across the street of their headquarters. Like Bruce was mentioning, having that face-to-face interaction, you know, seeing them on a regular basis. Like, you know, we've had, you know, retailers, large retailers say, oh, they're, you know, they're approved by X broker, so we trust them now. You know, that relationship and that validation is incredibly important.
And we did get from our interviews with the buyers, a lot of times, if you as a manufacturer think this is a direction you want to go, your buyer will generally offer you some names that you should check out. They won't tell you who to hire, but they'll say, hey, you might want to talk to these four people. So don't think that your buyer's not willing to help you out, because if you've made it that far that they want to accept your item or potentially put you in their set, man, they want you to be successful now. So say, you know, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Buyer, can you help me out with some ideas so I can cover your account as well as possible? They'll probably say, sure, here's 5 people you should probably talk to. So don't be afraid to go down that path, or speak to colleagues in the industry. Hey, who do you know that does a great job at Publix or Target, or fill in the blank? Ari?
Awesome. Yeah, and I really appreciate, you know, Bruce and Tracy, your time today. Really, really great information. So I think we're going to move over to questions now. If anybody has any questions they want to ask Tracy, Bruce, or myself, please, now is the time to submit them through the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. And then also, if you come up with a question, you know, later on in the day, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, info@roadtoretail.co. That's the info@roadtoretail.co.
So Ari, it looks like we're at the top of the hour, a little past. So I did want to let everybody know we're going to stay on for about another 15 minutes and get through as many questions as we can. I've noticed that some people have dropped off, but we still have a good portion of the folks that want to stay on and get their question answered. So we will try and get through as many of these as we can, but we also want to be considerate of everybody's time.
Perfect. So yeah, the first question we have today is, how do I figure out my trade spend budget? What percentage of sales should that be?
Oh, Bruce, that's a financial question for you.
Boy, that's also a really great trick question. So if you're an established brand, you may already have an idea of what you've spent in the past. If you're truly an emerging brand and trying to go to your first couple of retailers, you can probably ask around. Again, if you go down the path, you can ask a sales agent or a broker and I'm making this up obviously, hey, I've got a line of gluten-free cookies and I have an appointment at Kroger. You know, what do you think they're going to expect from trade support? People would tell you that number. If you have a very specific example, I would encourage you to email us so we can address it more specifically. You know, there's going to be expectations by category of what that spend is going to be. Okay, so if it's cookies and you hear through the grapevine that the average is a 12% spend, that's probably the number you should think about in your head. And again, if you're really new, you also have to know that velocity hurdle, because if you're not going to sell above that hurdle, don't even make the presentation. As one buyer told us, wait a minute, your projection isn't even making hurdle. So if I add you to my set, you're actually damaging my business. So again, this is where a good broker or sales agent can really be helpful. But if you want to send your question in with a little more specifics, we'll get back to you. But that's a great question.
And it also depends on the class of trade. Drug, if you're going into the drug channel, your trade spend is going to be much higher than it is, you know, at another class of trade.
Yep.
Ari?
Great answers there, guys. Yeah, so the next question we have is, can I sell my products to different retailers at different prices?
No, no. And Bruce and I know this from our big company background, there's this law called Robinson-Packman. And so you have to offer pricing, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Bruce, but your pricing needs to be consistent, at least across classes of trade. And then what you can do is, you know, offer them allowance. But from my experience, you know, your distributor or direct pricing has to be the same across all channels because you have to be fair and equitable to everybody. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. You can also do what's called bracket pricing, where you have certain volume breaks, and anyone who can hit that volume gets that price regardless of class of trade. But the important thing is it's fair. Anyone who can hit that can get it. Now, there's only a couple of retailers that can always hit that very top level of bracket pricing. But to Tracy's point, Robinson-Packman is actually a subsection of the Sherman Act. You do not want troubles there, especially as a small and emerging brand. Like usual, people choose to make examples of the small and the weak. You know, people aren't going to go really make an example of J&J because that could be legally painful and cost a lot of money. But for them to come out and, you know, nail someone's new cookie company. But again, this is something where a sales agent can help you stay away from that. Now, as Tracy said, you can end up with radically different prices on the shelf depending upon which retailer's willing to work at what margin, okay, and where they choose to spend their money. Some take all the money and roll it into pricing. Others are high-low, and they want the quote unquote action of seeming to have hot deals from time to time. So it's an excellent question, and one where you just have to be careful. Next, please, Ari.
All right. If you have a product that needs to be refrigerated, frozen, what additional margin should I include in order to cover the increased shipping cost?
That really is going to vary by where you're shipping it to. So if you're a West Coast, I remember dealing with this once before on an ice cream brand, and their shipping costs obviously to the West Coast was much different, and it was so expensive on the East Coast that they chose not to get into the East Coast retailers until they could get some kind of distributor partner that could warehouse it.
Yeah, so that's a good question where you really need to understand all the costs going in. So your logistics provider can tell you what they're going to charge you to ship that. There may be expenses from the retailer for those frozen slots in their warehouse. You just have to make sure you have all the all-in costs, so that, because once you set your price, if you've left something out, you're kind of stuck with it. So have to be super careful.
Perfect. So next question we have is, if you don't have the cash for a slotting fee, are you able to negotiate a free fill instead?
Yes, absolutely. You can. Definitely negotiable. Some retailers, due to accounting, will not accept free goods, but many of the, for example, Natural Channel will accept free goods instead of cash. So that is an option with most retailers, or some kind of cash equivalent to the free fill. So
Yeah,
the answer is yes.
The other thing you'll see out there is that retailers that are under financial pressure, they don't want free goods, they want the cash.
Yeah.
So again, if you're dealing with a retailer that, like in the press, or if the gossip is accurate, if you know they're struggling, again, be careful. They're going to want cash. Those are the guys that might start hitting you with mystery fees, deductions. So just be careful.
All right.
Yeah.
Next question is, if you want to offer an exclusive to a retailer, do you discuss this during the category review, or is this something you bring up in advance? How early in the R&D phase do you include your buyer for their feedback?
I'll take this one first. This is a great question. And as a smaller, emerging, or challenger brand, this is a real great opportunity. At a previous employer, we took a body wash to Walmart, and they did not want to have an exclusive for one reason or another. We then called Target and took it up there, and they said, yeah, let's talk. So we went up there and we ended up getting it in, and it did fantastically. And we ended up getting a call from our friends in Bentonville saying, what are you doing? And we reminded them that we had come to them first. So what happened? We got to build a great bridge with another national retailer. When the product was successful, they asked for another year exclusivity, which we gave them. We now had basically a 2-year test market to prove that this scent of body wash was popular with consumers. And after year 2, we rolled it out. So going to a retailer with a proprietary idea is a very good idea. Now, if you're very unique, certain retailers are so in love with their private label that they may ask you right then and there if you will also make their compare to private label. And you have to know that question could be coming, and you need to know what you're going to say. And it takes courage to say no. Okay.
Yeah.
I know.
I would just add one thing on that is Whole Foods is big into exclusivity. And so if you're worried about taking it other places, you can limit the timeline. So you can say, I'll give it to you exclusively for 90 days or 6 months. So you can kind of determine what you're willing to do. It doesn't have to be, a year. It can be a lot less.
Now, and one other thing, and then we'll press on. Sometimes the national retailers don't want an exclusive on a brand unless it's well known. So the example that everyone might have in mind is Harry's. So when Harry's went from online into retail, they had built such a business that they could kind of call their own shot. Now, if you want to do a proprietary SKU or flavor or scent, if it's a HBA item, that is pretty low risk to the retailer, because you might be promoting your total brand, but it's still something unique to them. Most of the retailers know that if you want to come with a proprietary brand just for them, that puts a lot of pressure on you, because let's say you went to Target and it struggles. Well, they know you didn't get that pipeline volume at other retailers to truly fund a national marketing plan. So they understand the risk. Doing a proprietary SKU, scent, flavor, really good idea. Doing a proprietary item or brand has other risk. Now, if you have a specific question, please email us and we'd be glad to talk about that in more specificity. But in generalizations, that's our counsel.
Yeah, I think that, including their buyers in the R&D phase is, you know, incredibly important. I know from personal experience, if there's a specific, you know, retailer that you really want to grow with or launch your brand into, you know, including them in various forms of R&D can be really valuable. I know, for example, you know, when we go into our category reviews, we're actually really there to look at our buyer and ask them for advice. You know, they are always open to telling you, you know, their ideas. So we'll just ask our buyer, you know, it's just straight up, we'll say, hey, you know, what categories or products do you think our brand would be a really good fit for? What are you seeing on the store level? You know, is there a specific product that you wish you had that you didn't have? Getting that feedback is incredibly valuable and a really great opportunity to kind of bring up the exclusivity. If you say, hey, if we develop that product that you foresee you're really interested in, you know, would you be willing to do a 90-day exclusive? And then, you know, you send them samples as you're developing it, waiting for that next review. And then by the time you get to that next review, you have them really excited about it, and they're, you know, way more open to, you know, launching that product, you know, on a national level. So great question. Next is, I understand that distributors don't really promote your brand. Since that's the case, what's the purpose of a distributor sales team?
So the distributor sales team can be used, yes, to sell the brand into one of their customers. For example, at a UNFI, they have, you know, a Fairway or an Earth Fare or a Fresh Market, and yes, there is a account manager for that, you know, retailer. But remember too that they are representing thousands and thousands and thousands of items and hundreds of brands. So really that sales team on behalf of the distributor is the liaison between the retailer and, as in this example, UNFI. So they help with new item setup. They do present new items. But there is a difference between helping to sell your item and to promote your item. So I guess that's how I would answer it. So yes, I have found it in, you know, in my dealings with the distributors, those sales teams can be, you know, very, very helpful. I just wouldn't rely on them totally to drive your sales.
That's solid.
Yeah, definitely. I know that, you know, there's obviously so many different retail or distributors out there, and some of them are, you know, if they're slightly smaller than a UNFI or a KeHE, they're much more willing to, you know, push their sales teams to get your product into new doors. So again, you might, you know, not rely on a UNFI or a KeHE to get you into those doors. But some of UNFI and KeHE's competitor distributors are, you know, much hungrier and much more willing to, you know, try to open up new doors for you. So definitely depends, you know, on the distributor, obviously. So yeah, that's all the questions that we have today. But again, if anybody else has any follow-up questions they want to ask, please email us at info@roadtoretail.co. And I really want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. You know, it was really great. Bruce and Tracy, I want to thank you guys for all the incredible insight. There were some really valuable slides. You know, we're going to, again, like I said, we're going to be sending out this, you know, slide presentation for everyone to download at home. And again, as Tracy mentioned earlier, we do have a YouTube channel, Road to Retail, where you can see our previous webinars, but also I will be posting this one probably tomorrow. So again, really appreciate everyone's time today. We will be having part 2 next week on 17th. So you can also use that same link that we sent out today to be joining next week's webinar. You know, I really appreciate everyone's time, and you all have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care.